Facebook. Welcome to another Witch on Fireside chat here with me, Karen Michelle, here in my witchcraft room here at my house during the COVID-19 shelter in place, which has now been extended to North Carolina from what was April 30th now to May 8th. And that's gonna make sure that we also stay closed for the public to be able to come into the Sojourner. Hey Jenny, welcome to the chat. So I was just saying that since North Carolina's governor has extended the stay-at-home shelter-in-place mandate until May 8th, that's what we'll be doing also. So the Sojourner will still be doing the phone-in pickup orders. Until then, hello, good evening. So yeah, the bummer, but also the big news here is that school is now out for the rest of the year. It was released on March 13th, and so yeah, that's it for the year. They're doing the virtual learning, and of course I have a senior. My daughter's a senior. She turns 18 in a few weeks, so you know, no prom, no graduation. That's all a pretty big bummer, I have to say. Anyway, for tonight's chat, I thought I'd announce first, important, that we are currently right this minute in a void of course, a moon void of course, which means, let's see, and it started right before the video started. That would be, it started at 8:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it will go until 3:20 a.m. tomorrow morning. So when the moon is void of course, that means that it's just sort of off duty. It's wandering, not paying attention to anything that we might want to do magically or spiritually necessarily. So until it enters into the next sign. So that'll be tomorrow. And then once it enters into the next sign, it's also out of the new moon cycle. And so it's into, the dark moon phase is over and it's into new moon. Anyway, so it's a good time not to be doing any magic, for sure. I did want to demonstrate something tonight, and when I saw that the moon was going to be void of course, which is always challenging to me. Emotionally speaking, it is a very just slack kind of time. Hey Jennifer, glad you're here. Welcome to the chat. And Alan, pleasure. Alan, Hermes Trismegistus for you. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage, mage, god of ancient Egypt / Greece / all of the Hermetic philosophies is pronounced Hermes Trismegistus. Hey Allison. Yeah, dark moon is definitely the time for Kati. So the dark moon phase to me is the entire time that the moon is in the same sign as the sun. And so right now, on a Friday, in the sign of Taurus, hey DJ, welcome. Okay, so it's Friday, which is Freya's day. Yes, Freya, a Norse goddess of love and beauty and grace, synonymous with the planet Venus. When you know I'm a Venus girl, Aphrodite girl, this is her day. We are now in the sign of Taurus. The sun is in Taurus, but also because it's dark moon, the moon is also in Taurus, which means that we got a whole lot of Taurus, Venus, good juju going on today because it's her day, but not right this minute because it is void of course. Hey Lisa, well thank you very much for being here for me. You guys have no idea how hard this has been on, well, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you all have exactly the same idea for how hard this has been. It's funny, I really am quite a solitary person. I really need my alone time, my quiet, but I also am, very much in the public and talking to people all the time, which is why I treasure it so. But, oh boy, too much of a good thing. Balance is key, huh? So anyway, what I wanted to real quick remind all y'all is that even though it's dark moon, void of course right this minute, so I finished the magical bit early before it went void, and now I'm going to just show you what it done did. But Beltane's coming, yeah? High spring, baby. Beltane, the Sabbath of high spring on the astrological calendar, which is how I celebrate. So not the calendar, Gregorian calendar dates, which, some traditions follow that. Others go by astrology. I go by astrology. To me, it's the most consistent system. And so I celebrate it when the sun is 15 degrees of the fixed sign of that season. So midpoint of the season, which will be coming up on May 4th. If you're a calendar person, that's May 1st, but for me, it'll be May 4th. And so that is the lusty month of May. Taurus being in a very earthy, physical, sensual sign ruled by Venus. It's all about the physical body's physical pleasure, physical indulgence even. And so Beltane's like the marriage celebration. We feast, we dance, we make love, all is praise. So what I wanted to show you guys, a little bit of magic I cooked up, because, there's not going to... Sojo Circles, Beltane is canceled, which is sad, because we had rented St. Anne's Chapel and everything. Had a big old plan for a year. But we won't be doing that. So one of the things that I have brewed up, I've posted the blog recipe a while back, like earlier this week. This potion that I've been whipping up here is a chocolate Aphrodisiac rum potion to get some motion in your ocean. So, what is in here? And you can still do this for yourself. If it's not done on Friday, it's not the end of the world. But I wanted to finish mine today. So, I've even made myself a label for this jar as an example of the kind of thing I do to remind myself of the birth chart information. This is me telling myself that I'm making something in alignment with Venus, because both the sun and moon are in Taurus, but I'm also bringing in the powers of Mars, because so another day to do this would be on Mars's day, Tuesday. So I am making a Beltane Aphrodisiac brew. I'm going to put this around my jar to remind myself what's going on. I like to use opaque paper because it blocks the sunlight out of it, and I'm going to keep it in a dark place anyway. Once you I'm basically making an alcohol extraction of some plant friends. And every week on Friday, I'm going to return to the jar, pull it out of its nice dark place, shake it up, and repeat my mojo on it. You can do whatever you want to do to put your mojo in a thing. But the mojo for this I'm calling on is planetary Venus and Mars in the sign of Taurus for Aphrodisiac good times for Beltane. So let me tell you how I did it. So in this here jar, hey Wendy, in this here jar I have added a cup of Damiana leaf. Damiana leaves have been used as an aphrodisiac to boost sexual potency by the native peoples of Mexico, including the Mayan Indians. It is used for both male and female sexual stimulation, increased energy, aids with asthma, helps depression, impotence, and menstrual problems. My understanding of Damiana is that it acts a lot like Viagra, genital engorgement, baby. So Damiana leaf went in the pot. Then I added, I would have added a vanilla bean. I could not lay my hands on a vanilla bean today to save my soul. So as not to ruin having some vanilla in there, I did use about 2 teaspoons of a vanilla extract, which is already vanilla bean extracted into alcohol. I put 4 cinnamon sticks. That brings in the Mars. Let's see. Then I added 2 teaspoons actually of angelica root. I wanted to boost that a little bit. The angelica root is used to improve sex drive. In combination with other herbs, angelica is also used for treating premature ejaculation. I don't actually know what those other herbs are. Let's see. So, Damiana, 4 sticks of cinnamon, a vanilla pod, or in this case, a vanilla extract, some angelica root, and then I put 3 cups of my boyfriend, Captain Morgan. This is my favorite rum. My daddy taught me that. Sailor from way back. So I put in 3 cups of any Jamaican spiced rum will do. Then I put I added actually doubled the cocoa content. My original recipe was for 2 tablespoons of a baking cocoa. You know, just 100% cacao. Just 4 tablespoons is what I put in there because I wanted to try it a little chocolatier. And then once this is done, letting it soak in the alcohol for about 2 weeks minimum. More would be fine, probably better. I'm going to make sure mine is out by Beltane, which is not quite 2 weeks, so we're just going to get what we can get. But after it's done, you want to pour it through a sieve, like a really big one to get the chunky parts off, like the big cinnamon sticks. And then I'll also probably filter it through more like a coffee filter to get the small particulates out. And then I add honey to taste, usually about half a cup. If you need to warm it just the smidgest of warm to get the honey to incorporate, that's okay. But remember, don't get it too hot or the alcohol will burn off. And then if you can find it, a vial of royal jelly. It's a bee product, and I haven't got my hands on that either. I've made this before and left that out, and it was fine. But the royal jelly is interesting in that it aids, and this is a quote, ovulatory dysfunction is the most common cause of female infertility. Royal jelly can help boost a woman's fertility by increasing the quality of her eggs and improving her overall reproductive health. Note to the ladies, if you're trying to boost your fertility, royal jelly, a bee product, can be helpful for that. So if I can get some of that, I'll add that at the end. I find that after I've added everything, I can bottle it up in, you know, smaller bottles. I usually make gifts of this. So if you're in my coven and you're a lucky so-and-so, you might end up with a little bit once this all is over and done with. But anyway, chocolate aphrodisiac brew. I've already posted the link to my page a day or two ago. You can find the blog if you do a Google. Little Beltane fun there, but you got to start in advance. And since I thought it was all Taurus today's my day. Oh, good. Alan says that the honey guy at the farmer's market on Saturdays has royal jelly. Good to know. Thank you. All right, another fun thing. I'm sure you guys have started getting yours, but I got a mug from our Teespring fundraiser. This one I actually ordered to be part of the drawing. So when I start to do the fireside chats, donation drawings, this will be one of the things. Also, I got some postcards printed, which includes some of the details of our, you know, our soft rolling opening on the Sojo. And just as soon as I had this printed, the governor changed the plan. So we're going with a ballpoint pen to change that. Anyway, it also includes a coupon because I know it's been a pain in the butt, you know, me begging for money on PayPal and making phone-in pickup orders has been a pain. So anyone who's placed an order or donated or done anything to engage with us while we've been closed and doing phone-in stuff, you'll get one of these 20% off survival sale. And it's 20% off your whole purchase. So when we finally can get the doors open or whenever we're able to get back to normal, our store's full of big, beautiful, fancy new things, which it's hard to tell you all about. And we would like to say thank you by making that easier to afford. So you may get one of these in the mail from me if I have your address through one of our donations, and if you pick up, that'll be in your bag. All right, enough of that. What I wanted to talk about tonight, since we're void of course anyway, and no magic really would be a thing, I thought I'd just do a little storytelling. It's been interesting the last couple of days. I've realized that, or it's been fun, because if you go to the Patheos Pagan main page or any of my blogs recently, you'll see on the sidebar there's the most popular, or I don't know, there's like a running for the top 4 most read things at that time is over on the sidebar. And one of mine has been jockeying for first or second position for a week and a half now. It's an old piece I wrote, very snarky, called 13 Legit Reasons for Christians to Resent Witches. Man, that blog got me in trouble a long time ago when I wrote it, a year ago. All kinds of people from both sides wanted to tear me up for making such jokes. But the truth of the matter is that I got a lot of experience with fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. And over the years, I've written a lot about my story. It's peppered all over my blog, especially my early stuff. I've spoken about it a lot. And it's what I tend to get the most feedback about. I know that I know a lot of y'all share that same upbringing with me. I mean, here we are, deep fried Southerners. we're just steeped in it. It's everywhere. It's really prevalent, and it can be really dangerous, I think, you know? It's not the good Christianity. And there can be good Christianity. I don't think that's what this is. This to me is more like cult. It's a cult. Dangerous cult. I know because I grew up in it. All up in it. For anybody who's around the South and keeping up with whack job televangelists in the 80s would remember Jim and Tammy Baker. Remember them? They had a Christian theme park all built up in Rock Hill, South Carolina, south of Charlotte, that had all their television studios and churches and a water park and amusement park rides and the whole shtick, a mall. It was like, an amusement park for Jesus. And that's basically where I grew up. Hey, Lainey. We lived about an hour and a half from there growing up. And my mother was a fanatic. I've said it before. And I'd like to open this up by saying that I love my mother. My mother has passed away already. We've come to peace with each other. But when she was alive, she was a very loving, supportive mother. The kind that would throw herself in front of a bus for you. But also would do anything in her power to save your soul from Satan. And, it was an interesting upbringing. She did everything out of a place of love. So, that being said, I think evangelical Christianity is a dangerous brainwashing cult steeped in fear, based on extortion of people to get them to give all their monies to stay enslaved to these shysters. That's my opinion, because I grew up in it. So it was tough in that instance. We were in church 3 times a week. There was always whatever was happening on Wednesday, twice on Sunday. There was probably something else. Basketball team for a while, if you can imagine that. There was these Bible study things where teenagers would sort of go to competitions to see who could remember the most Bible verses, like by memory. It's kind of like spelling bees. Anyway, let's just say that I was steeped in the fundamentalist Christian view of the scriptures at all times. So that was tough for me because, I was a little witchling. I didn't know that was a thing that you could be. But I did know I was a weirdo because compared to everybody else and what they thought was okay and the sort of things that they would accept, it just always seemed like I felt like an alien. I felt like an alien going, what's going on around here? What are you thinking? Why? For example, from my earliest childhood, and the reason why I bring these stories up is because we've spoken so much about witchcraft as an orientation and how does one even know that this is what they're supposed to be doing, and then how do they find their way into the community. We've talked about that. So it kind of keeps coming up, in these stories, these chats we've been doing. And over the years, I've had people contact me most to say, thank you for sharing your story. I call it my come to Goddess story. The unusual experiences that I had as a young person are shared by everybody in our own unique ways. So I thought I would just give an example of what happened to me so that I'm sure if you have even an inkling that this might be your orientation, you'll probably be like, yeah, something like that happened to me too. And, it all happens in our own way, but it's I think it can be comforting to know that other people experience this and that they can be an affirmation for your own process. So that's why I'm going to share this story. It's very personal. It's a very personal story. I might need another sip of wine. I got red wine back in my granny's chalice because I finally went to the grocery store after 2 weeks today. Lord. Okay. So, for example, since I was very, very, very small, I would have told you beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was just a minute ago, like right around that past corner, I was an adult man. This whole "you're a little girl" was as big a surprise to me as, oh my goodness. And it kept coming up in funny ways, because it's not like I remember every detail of it. I could tell you my name and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't like that. It was more like I just always was surprised when you can't cross the street by yourself. You've got to hold my hand. Why? I know how to cross the street. Because you're my child, and I said hold my hand across the street. Well, all right. If you say so. I resented being a child. I resented being treated like a child. And it wasn't like I'm just some petulant brat. It was more like, I know. I got it. I'm fine. I could remember being an adult man and not being questioned about these things. People would refer to me as a little girl and what girls are allowed to do. And I'd be like, what? That ain't right. So things that now might be considered very feminist and forward thinking, when it comes to gender equality, was just sort of a foregone conclusion for me. Not because, oh yeah, women can do anything a man can do, but it's like my spirit just knew that it had never been denied those things before. And why start now? Like, what's the big deal? So there was just a lot of weird things there. For example, I had memories of traumatic memories. Like I would suffer a kind of PTSD reaction when, anything to remind me of how I had died would creep up. For example, I remember when I was 3, it was one of the first things. And I knew already I didn't like being pinned. I didn't like being tight. Like if you were to just wrap me up in a blanket real tight or something, I hated it. I can't stand to have my arms pinned to this day. And I remember one time my mother, and when I was 3, was put me to bed. Really sweetly, she had tucked all my covers up around my shoulders, and I happened to have my arms just down by my side. And when she leaned in to give me a kiss goodnight, when she leaned to put her elbows on either side of me, it happened to have pinned the covers really tightly around my arms. And then she put her face right up in mine to give me a kiss. But because she blocked out the light and had me pinned, I'm telling you, it was like a trigger. And I remember to this day, the imagery that went through my mind was of the weight of cold, hard, like a concrete or steel. It was very cold and hard, being crushed, everything being dirty and dusty. I remember it being very dark with kind of a blue faint light somewhere so that I could see just a little bit, but that my chest was being crushed and there was something very close to my face, like I can barely breathe, but I can't move. It took me a long time to sort out what that memory was, but I freaked out on my mother, 3-year-old, and I'm squirming and screaming, and she's like, what? And so she pulled back, and I was able to get out of the covers, and I couldn't really articulate to her what had happened, but from that's the first time I remember it, and I know I was 3 from context, the rest of the memory. And then from there, it goes on to just affirm that over and over. I also know that whatever happened that caused the rubble to fall on me was an explosion that happened just off my right. Like something blew up here. And every time something really loud or sudden would come from that side, I would way overreact, like duck to get away from it. It's kind of triggering, and I would have a very traumatic, triggered experience as a child. But I don't know why. There's nothing in this life's memory to back that up. Later on, I realized through several other experiences that I won't go into now, and I now do past life retrieval of information for myself and others. The deal was that I was a soldier in World War I. I know it was World War I. At least I think it was World War I, because I was carrying one of those long rifles that has the bayonet spike on the end. Just, my memory of little details. I believe that I was in France, and I believe that I was in some sort of village where there was a building made out of masonry, stone or something, bricks beside me, when mortar came in and blasted that, and the wall fell on me and crushed me. And that's how I died. And so that was a thing. Now, mind you, I grow up, I'm a little girl in the South, in the Southern Baptist Church at first, before Mom moved into more evangelical ones. I have it's like this inner dude. It's like I can remember being a guy. I don't mind being a girl. I'm fine with being a girl. I like being a girl. But I had this memory of being a man. I just know I have lived before. I just know it. There's just things I just know. And so we'd be in church and they'd be talking about, you know, theology. Oh, you only have one life to live, and, you know, and you go to heaven when you die. And I'm like, really? No, that's not how it is. And then at some point when I was very young in a sermon, the preacher, fire and brimstone preacher that he was, Jerry Lefko was his name. He'd get up there spitting and sweat flying, and his face would get all beat purple. He was just ranting and raving so hard. And I remember he was making fun of other world religions and basically tearing them down for why all their theology was wrong by comparing it to biblical scriptures, like saying, oh, well, Hinduism can't be right because there's this scripture in the New Testament that contradicts it. It was a stupid argument. But anyway, he actually defined reincarnation for me. He gave it a word. Now, he was making fun of Hinduism for their ideas of reincarnation, but he described it, and I'm a little kid, like 6, going, yes, 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 yes. That's the thing. That's the thing I was trying to tell you. And I just knew, like a eureka. But he told me someone else's religion believed that. And I'm like, what's that? What's that thing? But I'm 6. And my mother raised me under a rock where you weren't allowed to ask questions. It's not like there was Google that you could go look it up, right? We had an Encyclopedia Britannica series. I did go read things in there. But for the most part, you just have what your mama tells you, right? So, but I knew that that was a thing. It got a little more confusing later on, you know, about the time that I'm 12 or 13. And like I said, I was raised under a rock. There was no real mention at all of sexual things. It wasn't like today where stuff's on TV all the time. Certainly nobody talked about that sort of thing with like a 12, 13-year-old. And so I had no real exposure to what that might look, you know, what's sex. It's not like my mom had told me about the birds and the bees, but it's just not a thing you talked about. But what I had heard over and over and over again from the church is that homosexuality was a sin. It was the most egregious of sins, that there was 0 exceptions for that, that, you know, marriage is between a man and a woman, blah, 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 and that you go straight to hell, or we're going to try to convert you if you have any inkling otherwise. So that's a terrifying thing. And then when I was about 12, and I'll never forget it, I had a dream that I have now identified as not a dream. I mean, I was sleeping, mind you. But for people who have a clairvoyant practice, you tend to understand when something is just your subconscious working it out and creating something new versus when you're having some sort of precognition or a distance viewing or an astral travel or some sort of a past life or a future memory. It feels different. It has a different quality to it. And I'm here to tell you, it was the kind of detailed, I was there, this might as well have been me distance or like astral traveling or something. It felt more like I was really there. And I remember the details so much, so clearly, even today. But I was such a young person, and this was a very sexual dream. And I am in first person in this dream. And I can tell you that the person that I was with was someone that I loved dearly. Like, this was my wife or my partner. It was my wife. I loved this person. We were having sex in this dream. And I'm telling you that there's no way that my mind at that time would have known how to create that. I felt it was more like watching illicit things that I don't understand happen out of my own eyes. Very confusing dream. So confusing so, but I can tell you for a fact it was a woman, and I can tell you that in my dream, this was my lover, and I was very much enjoying it. So I wake up terrified that this means that I'm one of those homosexual people going straight to hell. Like, I have this terrible, terrible secret now. Oh my God, what does this mean? This must mean this thing. I don't know what this means. Confusing enough when you're that age anyway, and then I have this thing. And so I finally open up and I'm talking about it to a friend of mine, and she was not an open and accepting friend. This friend never spoke to me again after this conversation. Not really. Not without looking at me sideways. It was a female friend. And I'm like, what if it means I'm a lesbian? And she goes, I'm telling you, I had freaked out this poor girl. She was like, well, in the dream, were you also a woman? And I'm like, no, I was a man. And she goes, and you remember having sex as a man? And I'm like, yes, specifically as a man. And she goes, then that's not a lesbian, honey. I'm pretty sure that's straight sex. I'm like, right. So what does that mean? Later on, another thing happens, and another thing happens, and another thing happens. And every time I'm in a scenario where little bits of the memory of my life as a man keep coming back, especially as a soldier, especially about World War I, and then ultimately my death, it just kept coming back bit by bit. So I had that going on. Now, mind you, that was all the very confusing stuff. And here I am being raised in, and I quote my mother, the fear and admonition of the Lord. This was like her mission statement. I'm going to raise my girls in the fear and admonition of the Lord, as if this is a good thing. Admonition, like to be admonished, like you're not a little girl. Fear and admonition. Anyway. That's abusive right there. Okay. So I want to tell you about this night. So it's a 3-part story. So that's the backdrop. I had also just come back we lived 3 years in Saudi Arabia. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. 30 minutes from Mecca. It was a fascinating, wonderful international experience where my mother got even more into the really extreme Christian stuff. Thanks, Karen. So while we were over there, because being Christian in Saudi Arabia, which is a Islamic kingdom, you're not allowed to practice any other religion other than Islam. It had gotten sort of more radical, extreme, underground kind of Christianity. That's when it started to get more serious. And then we had come back from that. I know I was about 14. I know it was around the time of menarche, or when I started to menstruate, puberty, all that stuff started to happen, which is quite often when, for females anyway, coming into witchery, that they will start to have serious spiritual experiences start to happen. Big time. It's like everything comes rushing in at that, an openness and awareness, and then it's like the spirit realm is like, oh, it's time to start bringing it all together. So I had been, because of all of these things growing up, I had struggled with depression as a child. And I do mean really long periods of deep, dark, existential dread, woe. I could see the world so much differently than everyone around me. And my way of seeing and understanding was so radically different than what I was being told was acceptable. And it's like I could wander around going, but hey, Mom, can't you see this thing? Can't you see what's happening? And she couldn't. And it was like, what do you have to worry about? Do the dishes. Shut up. Well, I'm not being rude. Just stop your belly aching and do what you need to do. You're a little girl. You got everything you could possibly want. And I did. I was very privileged. But I was still just so depressed. But we didn't really know what to do about those things. It's just not like today. And, I did fine. And, I was mediocre in school, but I was well behaved, I guess, well enough. But I was just really overly emotional and easily distracted, and was off on my own little internal fantasies all the time. And they just sort of let me go and be. And I spent all my time out in nature. I just had a much bigger awareness of the outdoors, and I lived in this creek and up trees, and I felt the interconnections of things, and I was this wild child growing up. But then now here I've come, by wild I mean like a wildling, like barefoot and dirty and covered in tree sap and fearless out in the woods. Like they say, if you're a witch, there's just no way you were outside as a kid not making potions with mud and sticks and leaves. And that's the games I played all the time. I played little old witch and cottage in the woods, and I would make like little forts out in the woods, and then I would make little potions and things and burn fires. I was such a firebug. I'd find things that would burn, and I would make little rings of stones, and I would, cook things over fires. It was all very clandestine. It's a good thing I didn't burn the neighborhood down. Anyway, just could not be more witchy deep in my soul. Now I'm 14. I'm in an existential crisis about all of this. I've begun to break from my mother's and my mother had her way of seeing. I have come to the conclusion that there is no way that what they've been teaching from that pulpit about how it is could be true, because what they had been preaching from the, not Southern Baptist, but we had gotten into this other like Mount Zion Christian Fellowship kind of, very evangelical, very fundamentalist, very super conservative. We had gone more that direction. And what they were preaching was more like who we are supposed to hate or who we're supposed to squash and what you're not allowed to do. My mother was, marching all the time in the pro-life movement and getting herself arrested, and she was just an extremist, right? And so everything I felt in my soul was contrary to what she was doing, and I had started to break from that. Now, if you've been in that church, they teach there's only one right way, and all the other ways are wrong. Their way is right. Everything else is not just wrong, it's I'm going to go straight to hell. Satan is your playmate. There are no stops in between. There's no room for there to be other religions where it's okay they go do their own thing. There was only the only Abrahamic religions. And there was some acceptance that Muslims and Hebrew people were also worshiping the same God, but they're confused. So really it was just their way or the highway. And so in my head, if I can't agree and get on the party line with my mother, then I'm going to hell. The only other option was atheism. They preached the evils of atheism from the pulpits all the time too. So atheism was more or less, you're going straight to hell, dance with the devil there too. Every time the words witch or pagan or heathen had ever been mentioned, they were synonymous with Satan. So I don't even know those things are possibilities. In that black and white world where the civil war against us, I realized that I had to be against them to be in good conscience, because I cannot condemn homosexuals. I cannot condemn other race people. I cannot condemn an entire gender to be lesser than, secondary, in servitude to the other. I just couldn't. And I really couldn't believe that the end game here was for heaven, because that to me was ridiculous. Reincarnation was the thing to me. And I really couldn't believe hell was a thing. But anyway, what would my parents think? What would they do? Would they reject me? Would they throw me out? Would, all those questions. And so I was laying there in bed one night, just insomnia. And I'm running through all these things. And I just kept wondering, why bother with all of this? If there isn't a higher divine purpose, if it's just nothingness, as some atheism might say, if there's not a divinity, and there's not some overarching spiritual anything, what's the point? To me, it just seemed like the struggle to survive was just, the daily needs of the body and whatever was just sort of pointless to me. And so I was depressed about it. And in my head, after many nights of laying there struggling, I just pronounced with finality, and it's like I shouted it in my mind. Like I'm angry. I shouted it with anger and force. I said something like, that's it. There is no God. I am a freak. I am absolutely alone. This is all pointless. Damn. But it was me pronouncing it. I'm done. I'm done thinking about this. I have decided this is the answer. There was such petulance. There was such self-loathing in my pronouncement. But then what happened next was what I call my first burning bush moment. So I'm laying there, and I know it was a full moon because the light was really bright. I had a second floor window that just really brought in the moon. And I remember laying there just looking at the way that everything is in that soft blue, right? The shadows and everything in the room. But suddenly, the room felt heavy, and I was being pressed into the bed, and the moonlight intensified times 10. And it was suddenly as if every molecule of air in the room was sparkling, glistening. It's like a popping little fireworks. it's bright suddenly and heavy. And there's like, you know how when there's pressure and your ears start to feel like they're about to burst, right? And I was paralyzed, not like I can't move so much, but that the weight and the gravity of a presence in the room was so huge. And I remember feeling like it was as if a giant sphere of energy was pressing in on me and pinning me to the bed. And meanwhile, my adrenaline is racing and my heart is pounding and I'm in a sweat. Everything went crazy. And the silence is just screaming. I don't know what to say beyond that. It's like suddenly quiet was the loud. It was as if every spirit, every consciousness was suddenly singing all at the same time. And it gave no other clue. There was no necessarily not like a voice. There wasn't an identifier. It was just a quickening, I guess, of awareness of this interconnected energy. I don't know what to say beyond that. I was struggling though. See, I'm a skeptic at heart. I'm like, get me out of here, and like trying to overcome whatever this is. And the longer I fought it, as if like this can't really be happening if I just blink my eyes enough or if I can sit up, but I couldn't move. And finally, after what seemed like a long struggle, I'm like, okay, maybe there is a God. I'm sorry. And then poof, it was all gone. It was gone. I mean, suddenly the light is the regular light in the room. And I mean, my heart is racing and I feel all sweaty. But suddenly the pressure is gone. And so I sit up and I'm like wiggling my fingers and stretching like, what the hell just happened to me? And I sat up and I kind of looked around out at the window and I'm like, nope, the moon's just like it's supposed to be. And everything was just ordinary again. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I remember I kind of crashed back down, laying down, like I'm just burying my head in the pillow real quick, like, oh, petulant little child. And I'm like, that's it. I'm losing it. It is not possible that God Almighty just spoke to me up in here. I am losing my mind. And so I laid back down. And just the second that I got laid down again, the whole thing repeated, only like multiplied again. I swear at the time, I'm like, oh my God, the moon is in the room. See, in my head, I felt like it was the moon. It felt like a sphere of energy, and it was so much about this bluish light being super intense all of a sudden. It's so bright, it was as if someone had a helicopter outside the window and they were shining some bright lights in the window. But it was so strong. And, I've since developed a clairvoyant practice, but at the time, I was just whatever. I didn't know. But then it was more like a chorus of voices. And I can't say that they said anything particular, but I did get the understanding that I was being addressed by divinity. That much was clear. But it wasn't an individual voice, it was a chorus of voices. So there's still no names, no individuals identified. But I was told unequivocally that there is a point, and I did have a purpose to play, a purpose to fulfill in all of this, and that it was real, and then a vision was given to me. Now, and that's a bit like a dream, right? But I know I wasn't sleeping because of all the other stimuli. But in my dream, like a vision erupts. And what I could see is that I had written a book and that I was teaching what I had written to other people. Simple enough. But you have to remember that I was raised in the Christian church, where the only people who talk to God are Jesus and Moses and John the Baptist, prophets. And the people who sit around teaching other people out of a book are preachers. And for some reason, because, well, I know why, I'd been raised in a church where at least once a week they would have people come up to the pulpit to testify what called them to Christianity. And every time there was a visiting minister, they would have someone up there to talk about the story about when Jesus called me to the ministry. All I know is I was told that there was something real, that I was meant to educate myself, to learn to write, to learn to communicate, and that I had a message to deliver. And the person that I saw was obviously much older than me. But the way I interpreted that, because I didn't know anything else, is that I had just been called to the Christian ministry. And I was horrified. But anyway, so I have this vision, and eventually I am like, okay, I hear you, I understand. And the whole thing was over. It was over, it was done. Now, like I said, no identifiers. No, by the way, there's another thing called paganism, or there's other religions. It was all just the way dreams, there's only so many images in your head they can work with. And I interpreted, I think, what I saw to the only thing I knew. There was only Christianity or nothing, right? So I thought, oh my God, it's that. And I rejected that. So from the moment that happened, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be called, I don't want to be, I turned down the job. I don't want to be a Christian minister. I don't want to be a Christian. I don't want to preach the gospel of Jesus or whatever it is that I thought had just happened. And so I wanted to disqualify myself from this job. So as any good rebellious teenager, I set off to be the worst possible Christian I could be. I read all the banned books. I did very much get into writing. Poetry became my thing. I kept trying to write poems to show that there were deeper truths to things. It was easier to write it in a poem than it was to try to tell somebody how I see things, just like, oh, I see it differently than you. Write a poem and people go, oh, that's nice. But I did start to read and write and try things. And basically I ran from Christianity as hard as I could. If they said you're not allowed to do it, I wanted to know why firsthand. So it was a really good time. I had a good time as a teenager, I have to say. Basically, I said hell no to the whole, this is your mission. But what it did do is it sparked me into exploration. So instead of just wanting to lay down and die about my hopelessness about why, this disparity between what my mom was telling me was true and what I felt to be true, I really dug deep into reading and learning. So that was helpful. Ended up in creative writing school, which took me to understand, or which led me to understand that I could use college as a vehicle of getting out of the South and into places where I could learn the things that were not easy to learn while living under my mama's rock. By the time I was 17, 18, I had actually met other witches and discovered, that's another hilarious story for another time, I've blogged about it, but it took a minute to discover that being called a pagan or a witch or a heathen was not synonymous with Christianity's Satan. It didn't have to be. Those were real things that the religion of pre-Christian world, those religions still existed. So I had come to understand that. I ended up at a school in Vermont studying writing, but also studying mostly religion and anthropology and history, where I got to learn the other side of the story. An example I would give, I actually got to read the Bible from an academic one. The Oxford Annotated Bible with the Apocrypha, an ecumenical study guide, has got all the historical context stuff in it. So I was able to figure that out firsthand, as opposed to what's being filtered to me with the propaganda filters of a particular denomination. So anyway, once I got up to Vermont, you're 18, 19. It was like being released from underneath my mama's rock in the dark onto another planet. I mean, New England is so different. And it was such a mind-blowing year. I had had my heart broken in a relationship that went sideways. Let me tell you what I cannot handle is 6 months of being trapped in 6 feet of snow. That is a thing I learned I couldn't handle. It was just a really hard time. And I was really struggling when at the end of that school year, I had decided that I couldn't go back to Vermont. And I was basically driving back home to Greenville, South Carolina. Had my car. That's a good 12, 13, I don't know, longer drive. And I was almost home. But on this whole long way home, I'm basically trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I had discovered Wicca. I had met some Wiccans. I had done some reading. I had been looking for a more ancient, more correct, more absolute religion in Wicca. And I'd read The Spiral Dance by Starhawk, among some other things. And they just don't play that game. It's not absolutism. It's not, oh, our goddess is the only one right goddess, and she can just snuff out the old mean evil Yahweh, and her way is more ancient, more better. Well, they don't do that. Like, no. It's metaphor. It's seek the truth from within. It doesn't have to deny the existence of other religions in order to be equally valid on its own. And so when I had read those things, it's like I was still bitter. I wanted it to be more right. Well, to me it is more right, but I wanted it to nullify everything else. And it wouldn't do that for me. So I had sort of set it aside. I'm driving back home, and I get to Gaffney, South Carolina. Now, I've noticed that my friend Bill from Creative Writing School is on here, and he also was in Creative Writing School with me. We lived in Greenville, South Carolina, so he'll know the water tower in Gaffney, which is shaped like a giant peach. So I'm driving down the road. I'm all woebegone. Once more, I'm just really asking the big questions of life. And I'm really coming from a place of heartbreak. I was really disappointed in a lot of things that had happened. I'd put so much weight and emphasis on how everything would be better if I only got out of the South, if I just got away from these people, if I just got away from this thing, whatever. And let's just say that I was externalizing the locus of control, saying, oh, happiness come from out there or from over there, from this other time and this other place. And when it didn't pan out quite like that, I was left floundering. So rather than try to just tell this off the cuff, I'm going to read this bit of my blog so that I don't miss any of the important things I wanted to say. This part of the story is called Roadside Salvation via Giant Glowing Peach. As I drove down Interstate 85 that starry night, just past Charlotte, my mind churned in an anguished, lost pleading for answers. Why even bother to keep living, to keep opening myself up to loss and anguish? Was this just one long, monotonous parade of day following day, months repeating themselves? The grinding of seasons, suffering the relentlessness of staying alive until at last I would just succumb to non-existence? For what purpose? Why not skip all the bother and just go ahead and snuff out? I was young, and I thought I was faced with a life of nothing more than constantly battling the inherent forces of entropy and decay for no other reason than to make another generation who would just continue the struggle. In short, I was deathly afraid of meaninglessness. My hand shook on the wheel as I seriously considered taking a hard left into a concrete embankment. In another moment of existential crisis, I was hyper-aware and once more wide open and pinging the universe for any kind of clue what to do. Beside that black highway, I passed by this peach-shaped water tower in Gaffney, South Carolina, that looks like an enormous ass glowing in the night. It is a ridiculous spectacle, totally unnecessary for the purposes of being a water tower. It is also fantastic in its over-the-top expression of pride in that being peach country. Click. The moment of gnosis that bloomed within me was like a 4th of July grand finale. The point, I realized, was that we decide to give life meaning beyond the mundane. We decide to celebrate, to make art, and to live beautifully, not just functionally. We choose to throw fabulous parties. We revel in the sumptuous delights of existence along the way, not just exist. We make wild, juicy, orgasmic love, not just procreate. We gather the tribe and share feasts on the holidays, not just take in sustenance. We eat birthday cake. Why? Why not? We make the key points along the never-ending cycle sacred. Why waste energy struggling against that cycle when you can celebrate it, flow with it, glory in the sureness of the dawn and the spring and the new babe? It occurred to me that life truly was in the details. The efforts we put into making life grand and enjoying it are worship. We decide that it is meaningful, then we back up that effort with the effort of trappings, and it has meaning. The struggle balances the reward. The gain balances the loss. The love balances the fear. Religion shouldn't be about being right, or worshiping God, or duty, or heritage, or fear of a distant doom. It should be about fulfillment, growth, and love. I choose if this is heaven, or hell, or purgatory. Do I focus on suffering, sacrifice, and atonement? Or do I focus on love, balance, and attainment? These were my choices. Suddenly I could open my eyes and I could see that everything was divine. And the divine is love. And I felt that love on that black highway. I changed my mind and the world around me changed. And from the rest of that drive and from then onward, I could emerge from the fear into wonder, and suddenly God was everywhere, saturating the world in delight. So since then, I've chosen to live a life of love. I make birthday cakes, and I decorate like a crazy person for the holidays. I throw big parties, well, when I'm allowed to throw parties. I carve ridiculous jack-o'-lanterns, and I wear crazy costumes. I dance, I make love, and I howl at the moon all as worship. What I sought, I found it within, and I was saved from that fear. So, my answer to the age-old question of existence was, I love, therefore I am. So, that was the story I wanted to share with you guys. From that point on, I found the beauty and the poetry within Wicca's systems and rituals as an extension of what I had discovered kind of on my own, and then began to develop that system for myself in a way that gave meaning. You know, I chose to give meaning to the cycle and to life. It doesn't mean that I don't struggle sometimes with it, but it does give me a framework that keeps me on track, no matter where I am in my own personal cycle. So I know that a lot of y'all have been telling me that, you've got your own struggles with, I call it the coming out of the broom closet, right? And to come out of the broom closet, especially if you've got a very seriously religious family, can be difficult. So I had a few tips. I wrote another blog called Bible Belts and Broom Closets, 10 Tips for Your Coming Out Party. I'm just going to really quick go through some of my advice for you if that's where you're at. Number one is understand the risks. So in my case, even though my mother was a holy roller and she loved to preach at me all the time, there was no point that she would have ever hurt me. So all I really had to risk was her not want to talk to me anymore, and considering nothing could shut her up no matter what, that was not a risk either. So I was okay. But, I wasn't in a legal danger either. There was no chance, I think, that anyone in my family would have been like, I'm going to take your kids away. But that is a risk for some people. So my advice would be, if you're a pagan in a situation where you've got really Christian family that you're worried about hurting you in some way, is to show great care, diplomacy, and discretion when broaching these sorts of hot-button topics with your loved ones. Be strong, but be safe. And if the risk there isn't worth it to come out of the broom closet, then don't go there until it is, where you can no longer be hurt. But we talked about that in a previous video. 2 is be willing to walk away. So I've learned, especially in my post-divorce therapy, that their only way to maintain a healthy relationship is to be willing to walk away from persistent abuse. You can't continue to let someone abuse you forever. That's bad boundaries. You have to be able to set some boundaries and then remove yourself until they are complied with. So that includes emotional, mental, and spiritual violations of your freedom to pursue your happiness. So my suggestion is to take the time to communicate clearly with your family, establish clear boundaries and expectations, and if their abusive restrictions or violations of your boundaries continue, then your simplest recourse is to remove your fine company from their presence. Leave or ask them to leave. You have no control over other people's behavior, but you do have control over your own affiliations. And then I would remind you from the Wiccan Read, it says, with no fool a season spend, nor be counted as their friend. Fool being open to interpretation. But if someone's trying to hurt you, you do not have to spend time with them. 3 was know your constitutional rights. Any overt oppression of your free will is a violation against nature. But if you are at risk to be harmed by your family members due to your differing religious beliefs, then you are being abused. But moreover, it is a violation of your constitutional rights. The First Amendment does protect the freedom of religion. And if your family is concerned about the validity of Wicca, just know that Wicca was federally recognized as religion in the 80s in a number of court decisions. It has been well established in law that it qualifies for protection of the First Amendment. Also in 1990, as of the 1990 edition, I should say, of the U.S. Army Chaplain Handbook, they included a description of Wicca with instructions for chaplains to serve Wiccan service people. And as of, I think 10 years, no, it wasn't 10 years, it was more than 10. I think it was in 2007 when it happened. But the Lady Liberty League got it approved to finally have in national cemeteries a Wiccan emblem on grave markers for the veterans who die. So it's established. 4 was gain sovereignty of yourself. We talked about that in the last video. If someone else can control you or hurt you in your way in the world, then gain your personal sovereignty and get yourself out where they no longer have that sway. Create high standards for yourselves and expect the same respect from the people around you. You can be awesome, be gentle, be informative. You can hold the door open for your family members to meet you on common ground. You can stand strong, but if they can't return that same respect to you, again, you can go your own way. Just remember that cutting abusive people loose from your life will ultimately be for the highest good. It is important to give them a chance to meet you, but you don't have to stick around to be abused. 5, change your perspective from combatant to healer. So one of the jobs of the witch is to be a healer, right? Yes, we all agree. So I'd say we need to become a field medic on this battlefield. Whew. Our poor evangelical neighbors are probably all suffering from a form of PTSD. There is actually a form of PTSD that refers to people who have come out of these evangelical cults, where they have been extorted with fear of damnation and fear of even physical and reprisal here by cult members. I say cult, and what I mean is the whole evangelical church. So they were deeply wounded. They've probably even been brainwashed. The Abrahamic paradigm, any of the religions that descend from good old Father Abraham, they're all a battlefield paradigm between the forces of good and evil, or God and Satan. That's their paradigm. It's this black or white, evil or good. And it's a nightmare trying to decide which characters are good and which ones are evil, because it's basically a horror story from beginning to end. The whole system is driven by fear of being cast out from the supposed love of God and into the pit, the void of suffering. This merciful God would damn his own children because of their inherent depravity through original sin, the weakness of the flesh they're supposed to deny, and then he'd torture them for eternity in the fires of hell unless they jump the hoops, fit the mold, toe the line, just so. But Abrahamic folks can't even decide amongst themselves which ones that is. So they're in a constant state of confusion and I don't know which one is right. It's like standing on quicksand all the time. So that's just terrifying. This fear of a lack of their God's love binds them like slaves. So I think we should have compassion for them and try to be the healer there. The post-traumatic stress disorder is called religious trauma syndrome. And it's a real thing. Anyway, they've been wounded. And we have another way. And we can help become that healer for them in understanding that it's okay. They're okay. There's not this original sin. There's not this damnation thing about to happen. And then to help them come to see that there isn't another way by being a good example of what that is, showing them that happiness and peace is possible. So paganism is basically a honeymoon paradigm. Instead of being a battlefield, it's like goddess and God in love, and creation flows from their love. So we know this, and we can help to... we know that even the most meddlesome of our proselytizing family members are still sacred beings worthy of dignity and respect, and they are also divine beings who deserve love. Which is exactly what Jesus was trying to tell us all years ago, so maybe you can remind them of that part. Remember, even Matthew 6:9 says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us." So, anyway, just try to be compassionate. Number 6 was be the golden rule in action. You want the world to be a certain way. You want people to treat you a certain way, and you can give that back to them. And I'd say that if there's only one commandment in Wicca or paganism, and that is thou shalt not proselytize. I mean, like, don't try to convert other people. So this isn't about you having a battle of like whose bully pulpit is louder. So just don't be the assholes like they are. Show them how to do it. Show them how to be a happy, fulfilled person. Honor their free will to practice their religion the way they see fit, at a healthy distance from your own. Remember, namaste away. The next would be to grow into an adult relationship with your parents and family. One of the things that is part of the Christian way of viewing the relationship between God and people, their God, Yahweh, and people, is like a father and a young child relationship, right? Submit, obey, don't question me, do whatever I say without asking, why. You've been a naughty little child, always trying to please, that kind of thing. So it's like a judgmental father God versus a naughty child in need of his spanking model. And neo-paganism, witchcraft in specific, are supposed to be parent in co-creative relationship with an independent adult-child relationship. So you've got to grow up and start to interact with the gods more like an adult on equal ground. Not equal, but a ground of dignity and respect as individuals, and not a submissive, I'm here for my beating now, sir, may I have another sort of relationship. And so in the case of an adult child, here choosing a path different from their parents, they have to, there's a whole new set of rules, right, from when you were a little kid. Human parents can offer advice as long as they live, but once their kids are out of the nest, they have no authority over their spirits. With sovereignty and free will, these human parents have no power to dictate the consciousness of their descendants. So pagans have to stop participating, I think, in that old system with our human parents that, obey your father and mother stuff. I mean, why are we sneaking around? Why are we lying and acting like naughty, guilty children? If you act like you've done something wrong, then you basically fulfill their prophecy that what you're doing is wrong. If our spiritual work is honorable, then we must act accordingly, without shame or apology. So, otherwise they were right about us being dishonorable. At some point, all of us have to both treat our human parents like respected adults and insist that they do the same for us in return. Adults engage each other in meaningful conversation about the important things in their life. They are free to disagree and argue with each other too, but that's what it's like to be in an adult relationship with people. 8 would be choose your words carefully and do your research. So I wanted to suggest that if you did want to start to broach the subject about alternate beliefs with your parents, or other family members that may have fear of what you're doing because they've only heard the propaganda version. I like this book. I know I'm going to hold it up and it'll still be backwards, but it's called When Someone You Love is a Wiccan, A Guide to Witchcraft and Paganism for Concerned Friends, Nervous Parents, and Curious Coworkers by Carl McColman. This is not written for Wiccans. This is written for everyone else with the sort of assumption that they have some sort of Abrahamic background or understanding of that. And it's divided into questions like, well, here's a thing I heard. Is that true? Like, for example, are witches polytheists? And then it gives an answer. But it gives it from the point of view of helping a Christian or an Abrahamic religion person understand what you're doing in relation to what they know. So very unique book. Here's a question. Why do witches place so much emphasis on the goddess? What is a magical name? And why do witches use it? Anyway, lots of interesting things. Of a primer, you know. What is the difference between witchcraft and Wicca? This is actually a very useful book for anyone to read, especially if you did come from a childhood religion. It would help answer a whole bunch of questions. But my suggestion would be to have this book, read it, make notes in the margins, right? If there's something in here and they're just mentioning vaguely about, oh, that's a kind of thing, yes, you could be like, yes, but not my personal kind of thing. You like make your own notes in there. So when the day comes when you're ready to move past vague words like, well, Mom, I'm really just seeing divinity in nature now, and you're ready to get into the specifics, or perhaps they discover something like, what is this word witch all about? You can be like, oh, right, here's this book. I'm going to give this to you. It has a bunch of answers in it. And if you've made it personal, then that hopefully would encourage them to actually read it for you. That's my suggestion there. The ninth tip for coming out of your broom closet is to get right with Jesus. If I could offer this advice from the other side of these here trenches, until you come to terms with the religion of your parents in your childhood, you can't fully evolve into your next big adventure. Those shadows will always be nipping at your heels. I'm sure you have wounds, so attend to their healing. Release what does not serve your highest good, including resentment towards the system or people that created them. Because you know what they say, hatred is like poisoning yourself and waiting for your enemy to die. Anyway, if you get to know Jesus, the mythology, you can separate from was he real or not, to just there's a mythological tale, and you can understand that story from like this New Oxford Annotated Bible, again, puts it in much better context, corrects some of the mistakes in translation that have found their way into things like the King James Version. If you've only ever heard anybody yak at you from the King James version of the Bible, by God, you owe it to yourself to read it in a proper one, because that was a mess. But anyway, if you get to know this mythology, you can learn the history of how the Christian church began, how it changed over time, how Jesus is fabled to be a healer, a seer, a walker between the worlds. He's clergy, he's a wise one and co-creator on speaking terms with the deity. He was a necromancer, raising people from the dead. He spent long periods of time alone in nature to hear the voice of divinity in nature. He was a feisty revolutionary. He respected women, challenged the status quo, hung out with gay people and tax collectors and every other leper and anyone that no one else liked. He cracked a few heads when necessary. He was awakened to his inherent divinity, and his message was that we were all children of God. We should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. All the same things can be said of witches. Jesus, the story of Jesus, and then you get into the sacrificial king stuff, it's basically the same mythological tale. Once you understand this character in an objective way, you can find some common ground and then release all the other bullshit. That's the thing. Number 10 was be the change you wish to see in the world, which I believe is a quote from Gandhi. It won't be easy, but I think it's worth the effort. Anyway, be wise, show discernment, act with grace. You'll know what to do. that was my advice on how to deal with it, how to cope. I know that one of the things that launched me into fame there for a minute, like a little bit of fame anyway, was when that crazy street preacher guy showed up at the shop that August 26th of 2017. Was it 17 or 18? It's been, gosh, I think it's been 2 years. Yeah, a guy showed up. He was one of those, the really egregious kind, with a giant sign that talks what it says, who would Jesus damn? And then it gives everything anybody could ever do, including witchcraft and sorcery and all the reasons why that's against the Bible, and so Jesus was going to damn everybody to hell. And normally he's the kind of guy that stands on the sidewalk with a bullhorn and harasses people and says horrible things, but for some reason that day he stood there quietly until we came out and talked to him for about an hour. It was hilarious. It was all on his YouTube. He caught the whole conversation, and people were like, yeah, you were really good with him. And I'm like, well, I've got a long history of that. People also were giving him a hard time, especially the Christians on his own YouTube channel. Like, man, she knows the Bible better than you do. Like, I have studied it. That's the way out of this, is study to me. I went back and I read that whole Big Red Bible with the little footnotes that are in there, the scholarship, the academics talking about the variations in interpretation of various words and different translations and how meanings can change, and the historical context is very important. So anyway, I have just yacked and yacked and yacked for over an hour. Thank you all for watching. Did anybody have any questions for me or anything before our little chat ends? I know we didn't do too much magic tonight, except, void of course. Like I said, until 3:20 in the morning. If you're just showing up, is moon of void of course right now. But I spoke earlier about how I've set up, before the moon went void, a chocolate Aphrodisiac brew with my Captain Morgan's rum and some plants, and I'm going to let that brew up until Beltane, an astrological Beltane, is on May 4th. Anyway, that's what I had for tonight. If you enjoyed the chat and got something from this, and you're willing and able to help support the shop while business has been so declined during our closure and the weirdness, we are accepting donations to orders at the sojo.com. Thank you, Lisa. Oh, thanks, Alan. Yeah, I mean, like, I write about these stories all the time. I got bits and pieces of it all over the place. Many times now, I want to add this as a little intro. So my description of how it feels in the presence of divinity. When I was laying in the bed, it felt like I was being pushed into the bed and that I was paralyzed. And early on, I thought maybe it was some kind of just sleep paralysis or something like that. Maybe it could be described that way. Except that multiple times, many times in my later life, as I came to understand how this works, I was opening myself up to it and really getting into a spiritual practice. Many, many, many times I have had what I consider to be a rush or a quickening of spirit, an opening to divine powers, a divine conversation. I've had so many burning bush moments, and they all feel the same. If I'm standing up, I feel like I'm being squished in a tube. So I don't think it's that I was just being pressed in the bed. I think that I happened to be laying down, and it's the feeling. It's almost like the weight, the gravity of divinity. It feels like being squished in a tube. You're both floating and the heaviest you've ever been in your life. It's like there's a lead weight anchor, that's your body, and your spirit is buoyant a bit. But you're aware of the confines of your body, but meanwhile expanding so much greatly beyond it, and there's this weird weight expansiveness thing, right? So that's how I know it's happening. And see, that's why I tell these stories. So Lisa said she thought it was evilness when it happened to her. And it's good to have context. At the time, I thought it was Yahweh himself, and I'm glad to say that it wasn't necessarily that. To me, it was just the quickening of divinity. But when we're told that there's not how do we know context? Context is important, which is why I think all of us telling our stories is important, so that when and if it happens to someone else, they can go, oh, okay. All right, that's an option. That's a possibility. So thank you guys for listening. Like I said, if you can make a donation to orders at thesojo.com through PayPal, we love it. If you donate, I put your name in the drawing bucket, and I have a number of goodies to draw for and send or pick up for anyone who can contribute. Remember that the store is open Wednesday through Saturday, 12 to 6, and we are doing phone-in pickup. And if you're not already a member of the Sojourner Clubhouse, is a group on Facebook. It is linked through the Sojourner Whole Earth Provisions page, Facebook page, but you know, a business page is limited on what it'll show you. So if you join the Sojourner Clubhouse, that's when you can see everything, or you can set what you want to see. And what we've been doing, Courtney and Lainey especially, have been posting photographs of all of our special stuff, like our tarot cards and our sun catchers and our deity statues, and putting the prices. Courtney's gone to a lot of trouble to include titles of book, pictures of books with their prices and that kind of thing. So if you'd like to go browse and see what's there, then you know what it is, and when you call the store, you can go grab that for me. Or you can put it in an email, and email it to orders@thesojo.com, and we'll get back to you. So thanks, everybody. I'm seeing people jumping on here right at the end. I appreciate you stopping by to chat with me, but I'm going to wrap up for now. I will post this whole video with comments and everything. I'll save it to the Facebook page, my Witch on Fire Hair and Rising Services page, and then I'll also upload it to my YouTube channel later on. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Happy Friday night, day of Freya and Venus. May you all be well through this dark moon cycle and into new beginning tomorrow. Cheers. Blessed be.